And then I actually sued the state of Colorado to expand the number of patients that a caregiver could help. At that point, caregivers, which are flesh and blood human beings that say, hey, I'm good at growing cannabis, I can help you, we're being limited by the state to only helping 5 people. And if you think about it, if you can only help 5 patients, you can't really have a store, right? It'd be like a pretty lonely store. And so we looked in the Constitution where the law was, we contacted the state and said, where are you coming up with this? And they just made it up out of thin air, that 5 patient cap. So we sued them. And we got him on the stand in Denver, and they said in front of the judge, well, the judge said, well, how do you come up with this limit on why not 6 patients? Why not 3? And they said, well, we met with the DEA in a closed door meeting, which was illegal. And they told us to use 5. And so it's like the judge's jaw hits the ground, and we won the case. And the importance of that is after that, caregivers could help 5, 10, 50, 1,000 patients legally in Colorado with paperwork to back it up.
Welcome to episode 58 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur here to learn how innovators are creating outsized transformational social impact. Today's episode features my friend Brian Vicente, founder of the premier cannabis industry law firm Vicente LLP, one of the catalysts of the cannabis movement, and a key leader in legalizing cannabis in Colorado. Brian advises businesses and governments all over the world and has received countless awards and recognition, including High Times 100 of 2021, Cannabis Law Firm of the Year in 21 and 22 from Chambers USA, and many more. Brian and I discuss his growing up as the son of an immigrant, playing soccer, finding his calling to fight the war on drugs, being an advocate and attorney for patients in need, founding a premier law firm, starting businesses, and much more. Here's Brian Vicente on People Are the Answer. Brian, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Yeah, I've long been excited to have you. Obviously, we've known each other for a while and just look forward to digging into your story. As mentioned, I'll know the answers to these, but if you could start off by telling the audience who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is.
Brian Vicente, I'm based in Denver, and I'm an attorney that's been working on cannabis policy for about 20 years, and I'm one of the founders of Vicente LLP, which is a law firm that works in this space.
In life in general, what would you say motivates you?
I'm really driven by just social justice issues. That's why I got into this space. Just recognizing that the war on drugs is just an abysmal failure. And I was able back in 2004 to say, I can take a crack at changing things by trying to change cannabis policy, which was a little daunting at the time, but we were able to make a lot of progress on it over the last, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. And you once mentioned to me that the war on drugs to you is similar to some of these recurring wars that turn into nothing for us. Can you just dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think, for people of our generation it's the war on drugs is sort of like our Vietnam. It's one of those endless policy wars that we're just supposed to accept. It's incredibly costly. It's very, very, very damaging to people's lives. The American public is just supposed to go along with it. And unfortunately, it's perpetuated by politicians, right? So it's really one of those things where it takes citizen activists to kind of come forward and try to change those laws. And we've been able to make some progress in that space.
Yeah, well, thank you for being one of those activists, and I look forward to digging into that. But where did you grow up, and what was it like there?
Sure. So I grew up in kind of suburban Cincinnati, and I was fairly conservative in my neighborhood. I was remarking recently, my parents were one of the only Democrats around in our little city, and we had a Michael Dukakis for president sign literally lit on fire in our front yard. So kind of gives you a feeling for what the tone of the community was.
Yeah, I can imagine. And despite it being so conservative and sort of different than your family, how was it like growing up there? Were you in a rush to get out?
Yeah, I think in many ways, Ohio is like one of those nice places to be from. It was a relatively, good schools. The community was pretty safe. It was a little more conservative than, my parents' ideology or mine. So by the time I was 18, I think I had kind of lived my life to the fullest and was ready to check out, new spaces.
That first new space was Grinnell College in Iowa. Is that right?
It was, yeah. Grinnell is really an excellent kind of small liberal arts school. Definitely sort of a, I don't know, hippie mentality in that there's no real required classes and there's no, it's sort of a self-governance model where our students can sort of, live their lives as they choose. And that appealed to me, and I was able to kind of thrive in that atmosphere. And yeah, it was an enjoyable 4 years, but again, Iowa is maybe, a great place to go to college, but not where I personally wanted to spend my whole life.
And throughout your career, you've really been dedicated to helping society, to giving back. Are there any specific experiences from childhood that really stuck with you in terms of giving back, or when did that sort of enter your life?
Yeah, I think my dad played a big kind of role in my, headspace growing up. He was a first generation Cuban immigrant and grew up very poor in kind of downtown Philadelphia, right? And he had this sort of ideology that every person matters, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, and that there's a lot of societal constructs that are in place that keep people poor and keep people uneducated, and we need to kind of fight back against that and advocate in whatever ways you think make sense. So he made sure that there was always a copy of Alex Haley's Roots, or just Abby Hoffman laying around the house for me to read and sort of get excited about.
Yeah, it's cool to see how you just sort of put into that environment and how it rubbed off on you. And you mentioned, Grinnell College, and from there, did you go straight to get your law degree, or what did you do right after school?
Yeah, so after college, I actually headed out west to Colorado, and really just to be a snowboard bum and sort of figure life out. And I spent about a year in Crested Butte and some other beautiful mountain towns, working kind of this and that job. I was involved in some degree of sort of philanthropic work at the time. I was involved in sort of a chief writer for an organization called skatepark.org, which provided essentially, we would write applications to cities on behalf of local residents that were trying to get public skateboarding parks in their town. And we were able to,
That's awesome.
Yeah, I just volunteered to do the writing around that. And we were able to get, skate parks opened up in New Zealand. And it was kind of like the magic of the internet early days, where suddenly you're plugging in with these people around the globe for the first time ever. And I was able to volunteer my skills. And I'm a big skateboarder, so one of those things.
I was going to ask, yeah.
But so I really kind of spent that time, and then I was fortunate enough to get a full ride to the University of Denver Law School, and at that point I was like, somewhat in love with Colorado, and was able to kind of stick around here. Really pretty much.
Awesome. I'm just, as an aside, I'm curious, do you still skateboard?
I do, yeah. You talk to people that during the pandemic they learned to weave, or they created a better relationship with their mom. I built a half pipe in my backyard. That was my pandemic project. So I'm out there, a couple times a week, trying not to hurt myself, but I've been able to teach my kids and teach some neighborhood kids how to skateboard. And it's just a joy.
I really love that. And I didn't, having known you for a while, I didn't really know that about you. So thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned getting your degree at University of Denver. What was that experience like? What was life like for you during law school?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that I actually enjoyed law school in the sense that I found the subject matter really interesting, maybe even more interesting than undergrad, just because you learn about constitutional law and, civil rights cases and even property law and contracts. And it just kind of explains to you how the world works, which I was lacking in experience, prior to that. But it was stressful. Law school is a stressful place. And I was fortunate enough to have, some mentors there that I think kind of got me. And, I worked for a federal judge who's actually still a sitting federal judge in Denver, who believed very strongly that the war on drugs was a failure, who's vocal about that, which is rare for judges to take stances.
Yeah.
And as well as a professor who let me write about marijuana policy. And so that kind of started to give me, a twinkle in my eye that perhaps there's a path forward to change drug laws, and that could be a career.
And then what was the path after school to eventually becoming the executive director at Sensible Colorado?
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to meet with my law school guidance counselors and said, hey, I'm interested in marijuana reform. And they said, unambiguously no, that's a terrible idea. That'll be a red check that'll follow you around for your life, and that's career suicide. And so that was somewhat disheartening, right? And I got to say, I talked to my peers, and they were basically like, dude, that's insane. You can't work marijuana law. Like, how are you going to get a job? And fortunately, at that time, a wonderful organization, which has now been around for over 30 years, the Marijuana Policy Project, began to advertise for essentially organizers in various states. And I applied for that and was able to earn a fellowship with them, where I was making $2,000 a month without benefits right out of law school. So it was not my dream job financially, but it was very rewarding work. And that was extended to a 9-month fellowship. And then I guess, we were able to accomplish some good things together. And so they said, why don't you start up a nonprofit, like a federally recognized nonprofit in Colorado, to try to change, cannabis laws there to help patients, medical patients, and also beyond that. So that'll happen kind of 2004, 2005.
That's really cool. And as frequent listeners know, I'm a proud board member at Marijuana Policy Project, and it's cool to see that they got you in. And to think back to when your classmates and peers were saying, "Wow, you're crazy," it must feel rewarding to now be where you are and look back at that.
Yeah, there's some gratification, and to be clear, man, it was, my parents weren't really into this idea. A lot of I'd be out organizing, and cops would like literally push me. It was a dark time to be working on cannabis policy for a good 6 or 8 years. And it does feel good to look back and be like, yeah, we were right. I think we knew we were right at the time, but we were 100 years of cannabis prohibition, and we were trying to change it. In Colorado, we were able to do it. It took an effort.
Oftentimes in life, you can be right and it can not work out too. So especially timing wise, like it's such a difficult thing. And it was incredible though to see what you guys have been able to do. And I would encourage anybody listening to also check out Mason Tvert's episode, because I think that your episodes will come together nicely. So can you just talk about the founding of Sensible Colorado, what the goal was, and then maybe weave in your work with Mason?
Sure. So Sensible Colorado was one of the kind of first kind of early federally recognized 501c3 nonprofits. We came together, and our mission was essentially to legalize cannabis in Colorado, which seemed very hopeful at the time, maybe foolishly hopeful. We were able to actually accomplish that later, which is remarkable. But our niche really became medical marijuana patient advocacy for the first probably 5-6 years. And we worked on that kind of hand in hand with Mason Tvert and Steve Fox, that were really working more on marijuana safer than alcohol campaigns and legalization campaigns. So, and we overlapped on everything as friends and colleagues, and I was their lawyer and they were my advocates, and it was a wonderful relationship, especially when very few other people supported us, right? So we were able to come together. But a lot of my work was, representing, seriously ill medical marijuana patients in court for free. We do these, impact cases where I would represent people dying of AIDS, and we'd get it in front of the news cameras and say, why are you prosecuting this 99-pound man for having a joint at his house? And that made quite a stir. I mean, we combined that with sort of more traditional organizing, trying to pass local ballot initiatives. And it was part of kind of a broader plan that Mason and Steve and I had, is, if we can get people to talk about cannabis policy, whether it's medical marijuana patients and how cannabis can help people, or we can get them to talk about how marijuana is safer than alcohol, people are going to get it, and they're going to eventually realize that the facts support a path towards legalization, not prohibition.
Yeah, it's been cool as I've heard the story over the years to just see back and how well you guys really fit together, and then how you kind of evolved together, even though you're, Steve and Mason were working on their angle, you're working on yours, but it all really came together and helped push not just policy in Colorado forward, but I mean, it set an example for the rest of the world.
Yeah, we always had kind of a big tent philosophy. Mason's attitude at saying marijuana is safer than alcohol, very controversial, even in the cannabis reform movement. A lot of people said, oh, that's never going to work, or that's too radical. And his tactics and, protests were very radical. But we just said, hey, let's all work together on this, and I think that is an attitude that, I believe other social justice movements can kind of benefit from. Let's go big tent. Let's not pick each other apart, and let's sort of accent each other's strengths and work together.
So when did medical marijuana pass in Colorado?
So it passed in the year 2000.
So what were you hoping to improve upon? Like, what was the existing structure that you were hoping to change in your initial work?
Yeah, so the medical marijuana program in Colorado was very slow burn to begin with. There are only kind of hundreds and then thousands of patients throughout the kind of mid 2000s. What I was pushing for was not only to stop arrests of patients and their caregivers, but I firmly believe that a storefront model where these folks could buy medicine instead of buying it from the black market or the dark alleys was a better path than what was going on. And so we were able to kind of try to educate the public around that by showing them, hey, these are patients, they're real people, they deserve to access medicine. And then I actually sued the state of Colorado to expand the number of patients that a caregiver could help. At that point, caregivers, which are flesh and blood human beings that say, hey, I'm good at growing cannabis, I can help you, we're being limited by the state to only helping 5 people. And if you think about it, if you can only help 5 patients, you can't really have a store, right? It'd be like a lonely store. And so we looked in the Constitution where the law was, we contacted the state and said, where are you coming up with this? And they just made it up out of thin air, that 5 patient cap. So we sued them. And we got him on the stand in Denver, and they said in front of the judge, well, the judge said, well, how do you come up with this limit on why not 6 patients? Why not 3? And they said, well, we met with the DEA in a closed door meeting, which was illegal. And they told us to use 5. And so it's like the judge's jaw hits the ground, and we won the case. And the importance of that is after that, caregivers could help 5, 10, 50, 1,000 patients legally in Colorado with paperwork to back it up. And so that led to the storefront movement that we saw in the state, and it really exploded over the next couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, that was huge. That really changed the whole dynamic and really created an industry locally, and tremendously impactful, and paved the way to adult use legalization, I would say, at least in terms of the structure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, it was the first time we saw, dozens, if not hundreds, of medical marijuana stores, up and down Broadway here in Denver, but also across the state. And those were legal, right? And then we got involved at the legislature in 2010 after those hundreds of stores popped up, and they were making a decision, we're going to ban these stores or are we going to regulate them? And we were able to lobby to get them regulated. So Colorado really had the first state licensed medical marijuana businesses, right? And from there, I just, it kind of plays in our broader philosophy. If the public can drive by a store and say, oh, that's licensed, there's not causing trouble, they're paying taxes, jobs, it cracked the door for voters to be able to say, well, if it works for patients, why can't it work for other responsible adults?
Yeah. And that model of state licensed stores and facilities has, grown very tremendously over the years. So that was, you said 2010 was when you started working with the legislature, and 2012 is when we passed adult use in Colorado. Can you talk about the process over that time?
Sure. So, I was one of the kind of primary authors of that law and also co-directed it with Mason Tavert. And it was a heck of a campaign. I mean, we had been essentially running mini campaigns and advocating full time since 2004. So it was, we benefited from a lot of run up, and we learned a lot of lessons over the years, and we built up email lists of supporters and people that were passionate about this, and that played a giant role in our success. We had spent so much time educating the public and advancing medical marijuana laws, and then we honestly ran on a shoestring for the first 6 years. We barely had any money, and we just kind of scraped by with creativity and earned media stunts and free legal cases that I would do. And we finally started attracting some actual interest from the Marijuana Policy Project, Drug Policy Alliance, in writing bigger checks to support like a robust statewide campaign. And so that's what we did, and fortunately voters passed it by a 10% margin that year, and Colorado kind of set the tone for the rest of the country and the world.
Were you surprised when it passed?
I was pretty
surprised. Did you expect it to? Okay.
No, I didn't expect it to pass. I've kind of always been in it for the fight. I was just like, we win this, and sometimes we won, sometimes we lost, but we just thought that the cause was righteous. So I was pretty surprised that I had seen polling throughout, and it was in the 40s, and we were sort of like, oh my God, but sure enough, we run pretty robustly, and that's in the face of a very well-funded opposition, and then pretty much every elected official in the state of Colorado joining the no campaign, and the people spoke, and the people round them out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, there was that 10th anniversary event here, however many months ago that was, and it was great to see Senator Hickenlooper and Mayor Hancock get up and say they were wrong. How often do you get to see politicians say that?
Yeah, that was a powerful moment, man. And we were kind of main organizers of that at the Colorado History Center, and we said, let's celebrate this historic milestone. I mean, think about when alcohol prohibition ended. It's akin to that. And we're going to invite all the big dogs and just see who shows up. And the first person to reply and say yes was Governor Polis. He's like, I'm in.
Yep.
I've always been in.
Yeah.
I'm going to come. I'm going to speak. I'll come early. And then we're like, well, shit, we're having success here. Let's invite Hickenlooper, who was a very vocal opponent, and let's invite Mayor Michael Hancock, who was a very vocal opponent for years and fought us tooth and nail. And they didn't reply till the week before, and they both said, we're coming and we want to speak. And we were like, the platform is yours, and they, to their credit, man, they said, hey, I was wrong. I've learned a lot over the last 10 years. I've seen that regulation's better than prohibition for cannabis, and I'm here to acknowledge that publicly. So it's one of those to me moments.
Yeah, now Senator Hickenlooper has become a big advocate for building the industry properly in the country.
It kind of gives you some faith in politicians, like they can admit they're wrong, move forward with better policies. And he's a great example of that.
Yeah, that's almost one of the main reasons I want to bring it up, is just because how often in life do politicians seem to say that they're wrong? And the fact that they were able to, I mean, to me, goes a long way. And it was fun that Governor Polis got to say something to the effect of, "Oh, nice to see you sort of joining the bandwagon."
Yeah. Hey, man, we'll take them though. And I will say, I spoke to Jeff about how everyone opposed us in 2012, all the elected officials. Once we won, it was a remarkable shift. We had, many different elected officials in the state get in touch and say, all right, I didn't support this, but voters passed it. How can I help with implementation? And I give them credit. Like they took a robust take on getting it right, not trying to sabotage it.
Yeah, that's great. And glad to hear that. And, this, in the history of drug policy in the world and the history of really the world in general, I mean, Amendment 64 here in Colorado was such a huge milestone. Looking back, how do you reflect on that milestone? You were such a huge part of this incredible change that spurred momentum of change across the world. And so I'm curious, like, you probably don't sit back and reflect on it too often. So, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. It's certainly, life affirming in some ways. You're like, all right, I believed in this. And I had death threats. There were highs and lows, man, for years, a lot of lows. And we ended up winning. And it kind of just shows you that like rational minds can make change. Like people can be met and can alter things. And I think that's worth highlighting in the world where there's so much negativity, right? There's global climate change, there's partisan issues in DC, and there's Russia, and it's like, all right, we can make change. We've made change in our lifetimes in Colorado. That's historic. What else can we do?
And I hope that if there's people listening that are working on some tough issues, that it at least provides them a little extra hope.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think, again, just, rallying around the people that support you and working together with them is how we accomplish it here.
So I want to dig into sort of how you got involved in the business side and also the structuring of regs. But I want to start that off with, you co-founded what is now Vicente law firm back in 2010. Can you talk about, how that started up and just, what the firm is today?
Sure. So, throughout the kind of my early career, I was doing nonprofit work, and I basically became like the guy who was in the news talking about cannabis, the lawyer who was representing patients or whatever. And over time, I had, caregivers and prospective business owners get in touch, right? And then as I started drafting and passing laws, people said, well, who are you going to hire to assist you with this? And so my phone started ringing. And so I formed essentially it was Vicente Consulting, and Then it became Vicente Cedarburg, and now it's back to Vicente, which is funny. It's sort of full circle. But the impetus for bringing on Cedarburg and partnering with Christian Cedarburg was that it went from being like a impact law criminal defense practice to being a business practice, right? We suddenly had licensed businesses, and they, for the first time ever, were keeping books, making deposits in banks, following compliance rules. If you think about the cannabis movement prior to that, like those guys were not keeping books, like they're off the book, right? So, but I didn't know a ton about business law. So I was fortunate enough to hook up with Christian Cedarburg, a brilliant attorney who had been doing business law for about 10 years at that point. And he, to his credit, he got the vision right away. He quit his job and at a firm downtown and I said, I can't offer you any salary. We're just gonna have to see what happens. He's like, I get it, man. And so he and myself and Josh Capel, who's still with the firm, and Christian of counsel with the firm too, really jumped into it, and just our phones kind of haven't stopped ringing ever since. So we've really been expanding and advising. We've advised over 1,000 cannabis businesses, ancillary businesses, and at this point, 7 offices around the country. And I'm here in Denver. We have a robust office in LA and Boston and New York. And in the last year, Christian Cedarburg kind of moved on. He decided to focus on government relations, and so all the staff and really clients have stayed with the firm. Christian's still our friend. He actually has an office just mere feet from me right now. But it's been fun, and for me, that's been this is a new industry, right? And that doesn't happen often. And my philosophy has always been, if I can get in touch and work with these new business owners, help them follow the laws, this will be a standout industry, right? This will not be thing where they're selling out the back door. Like, our work will remain solidified, right? If it was a bunch of illegal operations and cartels that were opening these businesses, well, people would roll back these laws. And then having a chance to touch these folks, and a lot of them got into it, a lot of business owners got into it because they really care about medical marijuana, they care about the plant, and working with them to try to be good corporate citizens. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I mean, there's always more that you can do, but it's a unique opportunity, and the law firms really, we're honored to play a role in helping shape this industry.
Yeah, I mean, you've certainly done that, and over the years become known as the premier cannabis industry law firm. Also, I know you guys have started doing some work in psychedelics. So just to give people an idea of your clients, and you're helping businesses obtain licenses in cannabis, set up their companies. What else are you doing there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of your traditional business needs, right? Do you need real estate? Do you need to bring on investment? Do you have corporate law needs? I personally do a lot of licensing work, so I help people get licenses in new markets. If Florida or Texas are allowing for new cannabis businesses, there's usually a robust licensing application process. So I help people navigate that. We also advise governments, and increasingly Native American tribes, and just entities that are trying to pass and establish sensible cannabis laws in their community to benefit their communities.
And speaking of your government work, I mean, I know you've advised states, local governments, and I believe you've done so internationally as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the firm's advised various different government entities from Canada to Uruguay. I was involved in kind of Uruguay's process where they became the first country to legalize cannabis, and that was really interesting. I was kind of brought down there by ultimately the presidential cabinet, and we did a series of kind of speaking tours around the state, trying to build up public support. It was sort of inverse in Uruguay, where the people did not support cannabis legalization as much as the elected officials, which is very inverse of here. And so, was able to kind of play a small role in the movement there, but it worked. And since then, obviously, we've seen it legalize, and Germany's on its way, and there's positive movement.
It's been great to see. And myself being in the cannabis industry, it's something I'm familiar with, but the listeners may not be. Can you talk about some of the hurdles that cannabis businesses face that traditional businesses and other industries don't have to deal with?
Yeah, so it's not an easy industry. It is a sexy industry, though. Like people are
Yeah.
like, oh, that's so, I can't wait to invest in cannabis stocks.
Yeah.
And I do think it is the start of something big, right? So there's a lot of opportunity. You have new states legalizing all the time. Delaware recently legalized cannabis, became 22nd state. So there's new opportunities there, and other states are expanding, going from medical to recreation. So the opportunities there. But it's cash intensive. I mean, almost any type of business you need to have property for. Those properties aren't cheap, especially when they realize that you're a cannabis business and you should be swimming in money, right? So the rates go up.
Right.
We deal with a lot of banking issues that traditional industries don't, where a lot of my clients have to either go to alternative banking
Yeah.
or just don't have access to loans and things that most businesses do. Of course, there's tax issues related to IRS Code 280E, where traditional tax write-offs don't apply to cannabis businesses, and that makes your bottom line that much tougher. And so I would say the biggest issue is kind of lack of access to capital, because your big banks just simply aren't loaning to these businesses. So that will change over time, but it is a challenging space to be in.
I think those are good things to be aware of for people that might be considering getting involved in some capacity or another. If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Any particular line of advice you might have for an entrepreneur looking to enter the cannabis space?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of a combination of be prepared to operate like any other business, but then also this is not like any other business, right? So it's sort of confusing, but some people get into it. They're like, oh, I'll just grow cannabis and sell it out of my house. And no, like you can't sell it like you used to back in the day. Like this is a fully licensed, compliance oriented field, right? Having said that, you don't get the tax breaks and the access to banking that other businesses do. So we deal with a fair amount of folks that are, new to the space, but have been successful in other worlds, which is great. We welcome those folks, but that's sometimes hard for them to get their head around. They're like, well, I ran a successful hedge fund, therefore I can run vertically integrated business in Rhode Island. And you're like, well, yes, but there's different rules and you got to follow them, and here's what they are, not what you dealt with in your hedge fund. And so that's a little bit of the challenge.
So I know in 2014, you co-founded VS Strategies. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So, because of the role that myself and the law firm played in changing laws in Colorado and Massachusetts, where we also played a big role in legalization, we had just continued to be contacted by either governments or people looking to influence governments, essentially looking for lobbyists and things of that nature. And it made sense at that point for us to kind of spin off and have sort of a side company. And that side company is called, still to this day, VS Strategies. The thought being that's where kind of the government relations work is. And so it's founded by myself, Steve Fox, who unfortunately has passed away, Mason DeVerd and Christian Cedarberg. And, really to this day, and we continue to represent, some pretty prominent clients, some pretty prominent governments. We worked with the state of Vermont to implement their law recently. And it's just, it's an interesting way to kind of, continue to give back and shape laws to be positive for this new industry.
Yeah, it's been cool to see how your work has evolved over the years. And I know you played founding roles in some other ventures as well, Simplify, VS Tech Ventures, and LeafWire. Any interest in digging into those, or just, I know that was all in 2016, so I'm curious like how that happened.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of life is just kind of who you meet, right? And around 15, I connected with a very smart man, Marion Marathissian.
Yep. I know Marion.
Yeah, he's just a wonderful tech entrepreneur who lives in Denver and really was interested in the cannabis space. And we just developed this philosophy, like, our law firm had been walking around grows hundreds of grows a year with a clipboard, marking, compliance issues down. And Marion said, listen, I'm a tech guy. There's got to be an easier way to do that. Let's figure it out. And that was kind of the impetus for Simplifya, again, with this underlying philosophy of like, let's make sure people are following the rules. And that's how the industry continues on. And from there, we started this sort of as a holding company, VS Tech Ventures, that assists with work and some other entities, and really just kind of LeafWire, still around, still really interesting kind of platform for connecting the cannabis movement. So I think that Marion kind of got our philosophy of like, how do we make this movement stronger, without just selling out, right? These are important companies for this industry to grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I got involved in the space in 2015. And so 2016 was like a very vibrant time, I feel like, in our space. And it's been very up and down. And there's been good times and bad times already. Like it hasn't been around that long, but it feels like it has been in some ways. And yet we're still at the beginning.
Yeah. No, it's completely fascinating. And, I think we're going to win, is the thing. Like we just got to hang on. Like it's like in Colorado, it took us a while to get weed legal here, but then everyone's like, well, that made sense. I think of the same thing. We just need to keep flipping more states, and eventually the feds will get on board. Big banks will get on board. We'll have money flooding in, be able to fund all these businesses.
Yes, exactly. And this is gonna give me the opportunity to briefly make sort of an MPP plug here. And I forgot to mention when MPP came up earlier that you recently joined our board as well. So thank you so much. And we talk about this sort of incremental change that happens, people start to realize, and there's been all this discussion about the federal changes not happening. And I think, one thing that at MPP that we've been trying to explain to people is that the key to the change here is the states. We've already been changing all of these state laws, and every time we flip a state, we get more federal representatives that live in a state where it's legal and are representing a state where it's legal. So maybe just talk a little bit more about the importance of working on state policy.
Yeah, I think to me it's clear as day. Like the path to reforming federal laws runs through the states. It's always run through the states. And I think when Biden got in and the Democrats had the House and Senate, we thought, oh, we're going to be at the front of the line now. And, and we got nothing done, nothing accomplished, right? No federal change of notes, right? Other than some statements. Biden. And so now I think we need to look in the mirror and say, listen, we as a movement have not accomplished the groundwork to create the urgency and the climate at the federal level, right? And the way to do that is to continue to change laws at the state level. I mean, by doing so, you're, as you said, Jeff, you're getting new federal representation that now will ostensibly act to change the federal law to not criminalize their local citizens or, outlaw the businesses that the state just allowed. You're also not arresting people in those states anymore. You're also creating business opportunities in those states and jobs. And that is all going to lead to just more and more support for legalizing cannabis. So I think we're about 9 states away from being where we need to be to have this be at the top of the agenda in DC. And MPP is such a wonderful organization. I'm honored to be on the board. And they have a plan to basically flip 10 states in the next 3 years. They've already got 1. So it's like with Delaware coming on board. So now they need 9 more states. And we've got a pretty robust plan to accomplish that. So I think, I'd encourage people to check out mpp.org and learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. And I also recently learned that you're the co-founder and president of the National Hispanic Cannabis Council. Tell me more about that and how you initially got that started.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mentioned earlier my dad was a first-generation Cuban American, and so he faced some prejudice that because of my skin color and my upbringing, I didn't. But that always stayed with me, and it was the messages he shared with me. And during the kind of height of COVID and the height of the sort of George Floyd race discussions going on in our country, I connected with a handful of kind of Hispanic business owners in this space, in the cannabis space, and we said, wow, there's so much movement and organization around African Americans and making sure that they have their place in the cannabis industry, and it's robust and it honors the history of them being arrested. Well, who's arrested at pretty much the exact same rate is Hispanics, right? And yet they, similar to Blacks are not using at the same rate as Caucasians. And, when you look at who owns cannabis businesses, it's overwhelmingly white people. It's not people of color, including Hispanics. And what can we do about this? There's organization and there's minorities for cannabis business organizations, but there's no organization in cannabis speaking just on behalf of Latinos and Hispanics. And so let's see what we can do to kind of fill that void, right? To make sure that that voice is at the table, that we're able to focus on bringing economic empowerment in this brand new movement, in this brand new industry, to Hispanics, and making sure that Hispanics are involved in crafting the laws, also involved in working at these facilities and owning these facilities, right? Basically, they're participating in the cannabis economy. And it's been, really gratifying to see that organization blossom. It's been around almost 2 years now. We have, some of the biggest cannabis companies in the world are, dues-paying board members, and some single state operators are dues-paying board members. Some of them most are Hispanic-owned, which is great. This is the first time they've all convened together. Some of them are just, big companies that care about this demographic and want to be on the right side of it. So we launched, in addition to the sort of national advocacy work we do, and we partnered with Chuck Schumer on some work. We launched our first chapter in New York City about 9 months ago. And breaking news, we're launching our next chapter in Chicago just in June of this year. So it's, and then those local organizations have meetings and meetups of Hispanics to try to empower them in the space. And it's been very rewarding. It's been an interesting piece of this, and kind of gets into that issue we were discussing about how do we make sure this industry is an industry we can be proud of, having sunk years of our lives into it.
Yeah, that it's such important work. And what can you guys practically do to try to ensure that more Hispanics are involved in the cannabis industry and ownership?
Yeah, so it's, we've taken a kind of diverse number of tactics. Some of it is like public education events, job fairs, and webinars. Just kind of trying to do things in Spanish, right, to cater to the Hispanic speaking population. And you'd be surprised, like when we hold an event in New York, like Tremaine Wright will come, the head of the New York program, because they care about this issue too. And they want to make sure that as they develop their program, they're talking to people that, have been disproportionately impacted by the drug war and are looking for ways out. And then we work with members of Congress, we work with state regulators to say, listen, have you thought about having, low interest loans for qualifying people of color? Have you thought about mentorship programs, as you're drafting your, as you're creating a committee on, social justice in Denver and related to cannabis, can you have a Hispanic member on that group to kind of voice their opinion? So, it's been good. It's an organization that I think is found its voice and is recognized as the kind of, speaking for Hispanics in this space.
Yeah, it's really great to see that that's come together. Excited to see how things evolve there, and hope it leads to a more equitable industry.
Yeah, I think so, man. And the important thing is that we're out there fighting the fight, and there now is a voice that's pushing for Hispanics in the space. And we work very closely with the other kind of minority affinity groups, and hopefully we're accomplishing something good.
So, throughout your career, like I said earlier, you've really been giving back to society, trying to put us in a better, more equitable place. Do any stories come to mind of when you really saw how much your work could affect change or affect an individual?
Yeah, I think, probably what comes to mind most is the advocacy I did on behalf of a gentleman named Damian Lagoy. And Damian was a Denver resident who had advanced HIV/AIDS and also Hep C, and was just super ill. And he came in my office and said, the cops came to my house, they kicked in the door, they arrested me for having a joint. And what can we do about this? And so I represented him in court, both criminally, which we won, and civilly twice, which we won both those cases too, where he cared not only about preventing himself from getting arrested, he wanted other people like him to not face that sort of prosecution. And he, unfortunately, he passed away probably 8 years ago, but I mean, he left a legacy of, like, imagine being that sick, but caring enough to get out of bed to come to a press conference with me to try to change laws to help people that are similarly situated. So it's, you know,
So selfless.
it's very selfless, and it showed me that, you know, with sort of targeted advocacy, we could help real people.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that really humanizes the issue. Seeing people like him that are struggling and suffering, and we've tried. As you know, I've been working hard to legalize medical cannabis in my original home state of South Carolina, and we do our best to kind of humanize the situation for the legislators there, and it's one of those things that's just mind-boggling that we can't get over the finish line when there are truly plenty of South Carolinians suffering that could be helped by medical cannabis. So um, appreciate all of the advocates that are doing that kind of powerful work and giving themselves away when they're struggling. It really is incredible.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a creative element to advocacy that, you know, like with Damien, I remember we were in court once, and I asked him to bring all his pill bottles in, right? And this guy took like 25 pills, you know, different prescriptions a day, and we lined the witness stand with every single pill box. And then he said, "Judge, without medical cannabis, I can't keep these pills in my stomach, and I will die." And I swear to God, like, I thought the judge was going to tear up, man. And, you know, it's things like that. Like,
Wow.
we were able to use that sort of creative advocacy. And, you know, those are the type of things that speak to people. And hopefully in South Carolina, we can get folks to see the face of medical marijuana patients and realize that there's people in their community suffering, and we need to take action.
Absolutely. So throughout this career that you've built, has there been anyone in particular that's been a mentor to you?
Yeah, you know, my mentor was Steve Fox.
Mm.
Steve started doing this work in the early 2000s. He came out of the Clinton campaign and then started doing cannabis work and was sort of a rock star in this space for many years. And we worked on, I mean, pretty much every campaign I had for a good 15 years. And then, you know, it's a big regret of mine. I mean, during COVID, he became very isolated and committed suicide. And, you know, it's a heavy weight that a lot of us bear. I mean, not that you can necessarily intervene in situations like that, but it does, you know, it speaks to the fact that you got to try to reach out to your people and make sure they're doing okay, because he gave so much to the world and to me, and we'd love to see him continue to do that, but we kind of are where we are. So you got to honor your people when you get a chance.
Absolutely. I mean, his loss was a giant one for the industry and the world. He was so tremendously impactful and an incredible human being, and certainly a shame. But if beyond all the greatness that he brought to the changes he made and the efforts against the war on drugs, to also potentially bring some awareness to suicide prevention around this, and um, hopefully that can just be another way that he can continue to create impact.
No, I think so. I mean, he was just a fearless advocate, man. He believed in this issue, and he could have done anything, you know, but he worked on cannabis policy when it was very uncool, and he did it for a long time. And his tactics were super aggressive, and he was successful. And, you know, he imparted that on me and others, and hopefully we're carrying that torch.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, you, Mason, and the like are absolutely doing that. And I thank you for it. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that, yeah, we are as far as we are in the cannabis movement, but there's still a ton of work to do on the advocacy side and on the legislative side. And, we've run into this at MPP where, maybe it's harder to get donations because people think that so much of the job is done or things are inevitable. And, we're seeing with a lot of things in our society right now, as logical as they seem, they're not inevitable. So we still have a lot of work to do, and hopefully we can do some things that would make Steve proud.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've got 22 states that have legalized. There's still quite a few to go, and we don't have medical marijuana in South Carolina and a bunch of other states. And so our work ain't done, man. There's a lot of people that can benefit from it.
Exactly. Well, this is the point in the podcast. If you'd like, you can ask me a question.
Yeah, I want to ask Jeff. So I'm familiar with your work on behalf of Israel. I'm familiar with your work, for MPP. Like, what is what's the single issue you're most passionate about just at this moment? If I could catch you at this moment.
Ending the war on drugs. 100%. I mean, there's so much of a domino effect to truly ending this war. I mean, the mess that it's created within our criminal justice system, the way that it's packed our prisons, the way that it's stolen opportunities from so many people, especially people of color. To think of truly ending the war on drugs and the disproportionate enforcement, like that is not only is it the thing that I'm most passionate about, but I also feel equipped to be helpful within it. And so that is empowering to me. When I got into cannabis, I learned quickly about the atrocities of the war on drug that I had been privileged to not really know a lot about, and was disgusted by it. And just for me, I put myself in someone else's shoes that is getting their door knocked down for having a joint, and it just breaks my heart. And I want my fellow citizens to be able to live free and comfortable lives as long as they're not hurting anyone else, live their lives. And so, yeah, I mean, every day that I get to work on ending the war on drugs and the associated, drug policy and criminal justice reform elements of that, that just keeps me going, because there's just a never ending pile of work ahead of us.
I appreciate that, man. It's the new Jim Crow, right?
Right.
Do to dismantle it. Appreciate your work in this.
Oh, likewise, sir. Appreciate that. And, if let's say you just disappeared tomorrow, you were done, what would you be most proud of in your life?
Yeah, I have to say the passing legalization in Colorado.
Yeah.
People just didn't think we were going to do it. It had been 100 years of prohibition, and we were able to get that accomplished. And then, there are a lot of sort of shockwaves and concentric circles that ran out from that. We now live in a place where there's 22 states have legalized, a number of different countries. At the same time, Singapore just executed someone for cannabis the other day. It's like, we have got to do better, right, as a globe on this. But we've at least crystallized in people's minds that there's another path besides prohibition. And I think we just got to make the system work and continue to be successful here and export it where we can.
Agreed. And the kind of last big question I have that I ask every guest, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be? And how do you think that change would reverberate?
This might seem kind of glib, but what I really hate, Jeff, freshness seals. When you open up like a pack of yogurt or something and there's an unnecessary film of plastic that prevents you from getting your food, one, it's annoying, but mainly it's like, why are we using plastic? Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time thinking about global climate change, and most of it's doomsday thinking, unfortunately. But I'm just like, can't we just get rid of those? I feel like that there's like got to be a part of the Pacific Ocean that's filled with nothing but freshness seals. So
yeah,
anyway, environmental advocacy is a passion of mine, and that's one of those little things that pretty much every day I'm like, again, another freshness seal.
Yeah. No, I like the angle that you took. It's the first time in 50 something episodes that it's turned into a little bit of a grind my gears segment. The things that really get on your nerves. So
really annoying.
But it's woven into environmental impact, which I appreciate. So thank you for answering that one in a unique way.
No, I appreciate it.
So I know that people listening are just inspired by your incredible work. You've literally changed the world. How can people support you and your impact?
Yeah, I think, MPP.org, Jeff's on the board, I'm on the board. We don't take that lightly, and there's so much more work to be done. And I just, my big thing is like, you just got to show up, like you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, but if you show up at your town meeting consistently, you show up at the state legislature, you show up to learn things in class, like good things will happen. I think, advocacy is 90% showing up, I swear to God. And then over time, you become a subject matter expert and you're able to find your little niche to make change.
Yeah, great succinct way to put it. Hopefully everybody goes and checks out mpp.org and makes a donation if they're able in our honor and toward our work. And thanks so much for joining me here. Excited to continue working together and continue our conversation and to get your story out there.
No, thank you so much, my friends. What a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.